hated that. I was really scared to have a movie of all the sins that I didn't repent of, like shown at the judgment bar in front of everyone. So like the 5-second version is that the book is a story about how an anxious, devout Mormon girl grows up to be a Lutheran pastor. I'm loved, I have inherent worth, But more than that, it's really a meditation on belonging, on family, fundamentalism, healing, and grace. I'm loved, I have inherent worth. One of the loveliest definitions I've heard for what grace is comes from a theologian named Paul Tillich. And he says that grace is being accepted, and more than that, it's accepting that you are accepted. I'm loved, I have inherent worth, Grace has been like a safety net. Grace has been an assurance of my belovedness, that I'm loved, that I have inherent worth, that there is hope, that then allows me to engage the world around me more honestly and openly, from a more nuanced perspective, that enables me to speak the truth when I need to, because it's never, my fundamental belovedness is never at stake. I'm loved, I have inherent worth, It's about learning how to reconcile and integrate seemingly irreconcilable and disparate parts of myself.
This is Infants on Thrones.
Baby steps.
You want someone to preach to?
The philosophies of men.
I like magical toys.
You want religion, do you?
Mingled with humor.
I don't believe in them.
There will be many willing to preach to you the philosophies of men mingled with humor.
We are evolving.
Baby steps.
You can buy anything in this world of money.
Look for the good in everything. Look for the people who will set your soul free. It always seems impossible until it's done. Look for the good in everyone.
Welcome back to Infants on Thrones. I'm Glenn Ostland, and this is episode 742. Sealed, an unexpected journey into the heart of grace. A conversation with author Katie Langston. And today I'm going to talk with Katie. You're also going to hear a few clips of throwbacks from John Hamer and Randy Snyder. And who knows, we might even have John and Randy come back in to talk about some of the ways I'm about to throw them under the bus. But now let's get straight to my conversation with Katie. Here it is. Enjoy. Okay, Katie, thank you for coming on Infants on Thrones. And I just want to say from the beginning, so you reached out to me maybe a month ago. You sent me a PDF version of your book, and I didn't even open it until this morning when I went, oh, I'm talking with Katie this afternoon. I need to look at this. And so I started reading through it, and it just sucked me in. Like, your writing style is so good. And I don't want to embarrass you by like gushing all over you at the beginning, but it's so simple and heartfelt and beautiful. And it's like this poetic tapestry of words that wraps up my mind in this like Mormon tapestry that we all share different parts of. But, you've got your experiences, I've got my experiences. And just listening to you share your perspective of being a Mormon girl with the things that you loved, the things that you were afraid of, and just that whole unfolding. I mean, it really was like watching a flower grow and bloom, like going through these different stages. Yeah. And then you'd have a chapter about your ancestors interspersed in there. And it's just, it's told so beautifully. There's so many ideas in it that I'd really like to spend some time in the future, maybe zooming in on some of these questions. But So first, I
love
just
that.
want to say thank you so much for reaching out
Oh,
to me. Thank you for
thank
sharing the
you.
book. And tell me what made you approach me on Infants on Thrones? Why did you bring this into my world?
Yeah, well, so the book is a sort of a story of an unfolding, kind of, we in the Mormon internet world we call them faith crises or faith
Yeah.
transitions or whatever
Right.
you want to call it, that took place over a period of about, well, it tells a story of sort of my whole life, but in particular there's about a decade in there when I was really wrestling with my faith and my identity as a Mormon. And when you kind of go through some of those difficult, more angsty periods,
Yeah.
which was back in the probably early 2010s, right, in the 20 teens, I guess we might call them, I don't know. I listened to Infants on Thrones quite a bit because it would always make me laugh. It would make me think, and it, helped me sort of blow off some steam. I remember listening to it and while I'm on a run or a, drive or whatever. But I hadn't listened too much recently, but then I went back and
Not as many people have.
Sure.
Yeah. It's changed.
Yeah. But I went back and I saw recently that you'd had some folks on and you were talking about, spirituality and meaning making and sort of, had this kind of pivot a little bit. It looked like to me in terms of what kinds of topics you were discussing, and I thought, oh, I should reach out to Glenn and see if he'd be up for for a conversation. So that's why part of that whole deconstructive process and the, I don't know, John Hamer is a friend of mine, and hearing him sing badly, I have a
Problem is all inside your head, it seems to me. One thing you will discover when you get next to one another is everybody needs some priesthood power. From one data point, we've drawn a line.
John Hammond says no.
I don't know, John Hamer is a friend of mine, and hearing him sing badly, I have a very I have a very strong memory of that.
Yeah, he's done some great singing with us in the past. Yeah,
it's true.
Yeah, and I wondered as I was reading through different portions of your book, you mentioned a Community of Christ at some point, and John was John one of those pastors that really helped you through this transition?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I think, he, for a lot of folks that sort of come through the crisis period, I think he has been a really influential voice in kind of helping people contextualize and make sense of their experience, make sense of perhaps faith, or at least give them the opportunity to see that there are other ways to approach faith. And so that was really, really helpful. I met John, so I mostly, listened to him on podcasts and then I got to be acquainted with him a little bit after that, when I'd started kind of being involved in the Salt Lake City Community of Christ congregation. This was back when Robin Linkhart was, she's an apostle now in Community of Christ, but she was on special assignment when she was a 70, pastoring the Salt Lake congregation. So I met her through Lindsay Park, who's a friend of mine as well. And then through her, I got a chance to meet John and, spend some time with him. I think during Sunstone one time we were either both staying at this house, or we were hanging out at this house. I can't remember, but yeah, those, the Community of Christ folks were really helpful, even though I didn't end up, in that tradition. I'm really good friends with a lot of them, and super grateful for the for the outreach that they've done to Mormons in crisis.
Yeah. All right. So for listeners right now who don't know what your book is about, why don't you give me just a quick overview? How would you describe it? What is the story that it tells, and what are some of the main things that you focus on?
Yeah. So like the 5-second version is that the book is a story about how an anxious, devout Mormon girl grows up to be a Lutheran pastor.
Yeah.
But more than that, it's really a meditation on belonging, on family, fundamentalism, healing, and grace. And it's about learning how to reconcile and integrate seemingly irreconcilable and disparate parts of myself.
Yes.
And by extension, hopefully also offer a window for readers to be like, oh, certainly no two stories are the same, but my hope for the book is that, folks can read it and be like, oh, I can see something, maybe an avenue that I didn't know was there before. Because I think the telling of our stories is transformative and important.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned grace, and that to me seemed like it was really the if the Book of Mormon is the keystone of the Mormon religion, then grace is kind of the big keystone of what your experience was in that transition from anxious Mormon girl full of scrupulosity, growing into a Lutheran minister. So tell me a little bit, what is grace? Because as a Mormon, that word always seemed kind of wishy-washy to me. But tell me, what has your experience been with grace, and what is it?
I think one of the loveliest definitions I've heard for what grace is comes from a theologian named Paul Tillich. And he says that grace is being accepted, and more than that, it's accepting that you are accepted. And my experience has been that grace has been like a safety net. Grace has been an assurance of that of my belovedness, that I'm loved, that have inherent worth, that there is hope, that then allows me to engage the world around me more honestly and openly, from a more nuanced perspective, that enables me to speak the truth when I need to, because it's never, my fundamental belovedness is never at stake.
Yeah. I took a couple of screenshots, some things that I wanted to read from your book and have you respond to. And I don't remember if this was one I did or not. Let me take a look real quick. Yeah, this one wasn't one that I wrote down, but there's a conversation that you have at one point in the book where you called your dad and you said, I just wanted to let you know in a moment. And the way that you said it was either in brutal honesty or complete recklessness, something like that. I just wanted to let you know, I've decided that I'm no longer just going to go along with what you say to try and keep the peace.
Yeah. And
he said, I didn't know that you were doing that, Katie. And you're like, that's all I've been doing my entire life.
Yeah.
That was a powerful moment to read. What was that like to experience?
I remember I was shaking.
Yeah.
When I picked up the phone. I called my mom and my dad, but it was for my dad, that I made the call. And it was a conversation that then also took some time to live into. Yeah. Like you can say, hey, I'm not gonna I'm not going to live just because you want me to do it. I'm not going to do that anymore. But then when your entire life, that's been your pattern and has been the first thought in your head,
Right.
it takes some time to undo that.
Yeah.
But I remember it was a pivotal moment just to A, admit to myself that's what I'd been doing.
Yeah.
And then B, to say out loud to, someone that I'd been trying to please my whole life.
Yeah.
And to say, even if I don't please you as much as I did, or even at all, which thankfully hasn't turned out to be the case. It's been touch and go here and there, that I need to, I'm no longer going to live out of that. I'm no longer going to live out of the fear of your rejection, but instead I'm going to live out of the confidence I have in my being accepted.
Yeah. So when I asked you to talk about grace, you said something about being your authentic self. And I think what you just said right there is no longer living with that constant fear of being rejected by other people, because grace is that acceptance. It's that unconditional love and acceptance. And I really loved the way that you brought this out in your book, that being raised in the Mormon culture, you were taught very much conditional love, the if X then Y.
Yep.
And instead of discovering, oh wait, God, this universe, nature, however you want to frame whatever that thing is full of this unconditional love and grace. It's the man-made structure of Mormonism that's trying to impose its fear onto the culture. And so much of what you write about is, it just highlights that. And I didn't feel like it was ever preachy, like you were hitting me over the head with a hammer to make the point, but it was just these very beautiful, simple moments. So I want to bring up one of them here. One of the first stories that you tell, I think you were maybe 3 or 5 years old. You were in a car, you were in your car seat, and you were doing something, and your mom saw you doing it. Right. And she responded to you in a certain way, and then you responded to her, and it put this program into your mind that was basically what you said is, you cannot trust your own body, and you can do something horribly wrong without even knowing it. So could you talk a little bit about what that experience and how that tied into, I am probably going to keep coming back to this metaphor of a flower that's blooming, like sprouting from a seed and going along this whole growth process. But this was one of those early germination things. It was setting up some, like, the parameters for your growth and some of this contrast you were going to be experiencing. So tell me about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say, sort of as a funny anecdote to get into that, I have a 14-year-old daughter. Yeah. And she said, she started to read my book, but the fact that there's childhood masturbation in the first chapter made her too embarrassed to go on. But anyway, just to, name what precisely we're talking about there.
And isn't it funny, because for as much as their mother, you would want to say, you don't need to be embarrassed about this. You don't need to feel any shame about this. Like, she's going to do what she wants. She's going to feel how until she gets to that point. Yeah.
Right. But... Exactly. But yeah, I mean, you think about just sort of the lesson getting ingrained really, really early on, that your body isn't safe, right? Like, your body doing what it does, its natural development, is something to be afraid of. It's something to be ashamed of. It's something to hide. It's something to resist. And how that experience really did kind of set the stage for some of the more developed kind of scrupulosity and anxiety that I experienced later. And it certainly, it doesn't help anyone that, Mormons talk about, sexual purity as if it's like the sin next to murder. That helps no one. But even still, just that sense of something normal and natural being like deeply pathologized, that's that's really scary, and that can get in deep, I think, into a kid.
Yeah. When you got baptized,
Mm-hmm.
it seemed that you were both attracted to and terrified of this idea of perfection. And this goes into the scrupulosity part. Tell me a little bit more about that. Like what was this ideal of perfection for you, and how did you experience it?
I think when I was young, it was about not doing the bad things. It was about making sure that like every single little sin had been sin. I could put that in scare quotes, right? Every single little sin had been acknowledged and accounted
Right.
for and
Yeah.
recognized and named, so that I wouldn't end up with like a black mark, on my ledger. Or I don't, did you grow up being told that like at the judgment bar they're gonna like show a movie of all the sins that you didn't repent of?
Yeah, I mean, sort of, yeah.
Like, I hated that. I was really scared to have a movie of all the sins that I didn't repent of, like shown at the judgment bar in front of everyone.
Especially since you had this idea in your mind that you could do something horribly wrong without even knowing it.
Exactly.
So even if you're doing your absolute best to stay perfectly clean and pure, you might end up having unpure thoughts about the bishop.
Exactly.
Like things that you can't even control.
Right.
What?
Exactly.
Who did that?
Right. Exactly.
And then you're just carrying around so much self-manufactured guilt and shame because you're doing what you think is the right thing. And then you put these prayers, like I recognized some of the language in your prayer, please forgive me for all of my sins, just over and over and over again, constantly pleading, and please forgive me for all of my sins, even the ones that I don't even know that I'm doing, especially the ones that I don't even know that I'm doing.
Yeah.
And did you ever feel like you were forgiven of those things up until your moment of finding grace?
I don't think I ever did. No. Part of that has to do with the framework was fundamentally false, right? That we have to keep this like painstaking accounting of everything we've done and make sure that we clear the slate in order to, we have to apply the atonement like a skin cream to make sure that it's covered up that blemish, So that framework in and of itself is impossible and completely unhealthy.
Yeah.
But then also that's the nature of scrupulosity, right? Like scrupulosity, I don't know if you've had folks on that have talked about it before, but it's clinically, it's a diagnosable form of OCD. It's OCD that takes on a religious, the content of the obsessions and compulsions have to do with like religion and morality. That's the nature of it.
Yeah.
And so part of it is the framework that set me up to not be able to have any breathing room. But then the other part is that's what OCD and scrupulosity do. They put your brain on a loop, and you might feel better for a minute, but then it's going to come back again and again and again. And so, it took a very long time, well into adulthood, to be able to learn how to manage that and to be able to let go, some of that anxiety.
And especially letting go of what you don't know, because
Exactly.
you watched this Alfred Hitchcock
Yeah.
movie at one point with what it was Gregory Peck,
Uh-huh.
who had amnesia because he had done this horrible thing in his childhood, had this horrible blocked memory, and then finally you figure out at the end, and then that made you think, what are the horrible things that I've done that I've blocked out?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, by the way, it's kind of a creepy movie. I went back and I rewatched it when I was writing
What's
this.
the name of it again?
It's called Spellbound.
Spellbound, right.
And like Salvador Dali created these dream sequences for it. So it's a very Freudian film. Anyway, when I went back and rewatched it as a grown-up, as I was working on this book, I was like, that was weird that my parents had us watch that. But anyway.
Yeah.
Oh, God bless them.
It makes me want to go and watch it again. I'm sure I've seen it, but it's been so
Yeah.
long since I've seen any Hitchcock films. I need to get back into Hitchcock.
And the therapist has a love affair with her client, and I'm like, that's not what we would do these days. That's not what we would do these days.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned therapies and therapists, and I've gone back to school. I'm getting a master's right now in clinical mental health counseling, and
cool.
Last month we were studying the theories, all the varying theories, and one is called choice theory or reality theory, and it was developed by a guy named William Glasser. And as part of my learning about this, he took I think it's Stephen Covey's highly effective habit, or like the 7 habits of highly effective people, and he did a spin on that. And what he wanted to do is say, basically, as a man thinketh, so is he. The way that you see the world, the way that you think about things, is the way that things are going to show up for you. And I thought that you did an excellent job of showing that in your writing. But he said, so if people really want to create inner peace, to find this, he doesn't use the word grace, but he's talking about grace, basically, this acceptance of who you are unconditionally, no matter what. We need to get away from what he calls external control psychology, where we think that grace is going to be given to us from the outside, or that love or worthiness or validation, that this is going to come from others, external from us, and really change our mindset that it comes from us. So we are the source of it. We can be the source of it. And so he did these 7 deadly habits of external control psychology, which are criticizing, blaming, complaining, nagging, threatening, punishing, and bribing. And so because I read this recently, I was kind of filtering your story through the external control psychology, and then he compares it to what he calls the 7 caring habits. And if you are able to change those habits of external control psychology and create in yourself these 7 caring habits, you're going to find more peace of mind. And the 7 caring habits are supporting, encouraging, listening, accepting, trusting, respecting, and negotiating differences. And so again, this is fresh in my mind, so I'm filtering your entire story through this paradigm right here.
Yeah.
But I think about the time when your dad found out that you and your sisters were struggling with the church.
Right.
And what did he start doing? He was complaining, he was blaming, he was threatening, he was punishing, he was bribing.
Yeah.
What can I do to get you to come back to the thing? Like, there's so much of this external control psychology, not just in the world, but in the Mormon church and in our own minds. You also talked about there's times where somebody will leave the Mormon church and they'll go into a new space, but they'll carry these same types of habits
Yes.
with them. And what I saw in your story, and again, I haven't finished the last section of it, but this transition of going from a place of feeling very powerless because you're trapped in this external control psychology model and thinking, I have to do something to get the grace of God, to get the forgiveness of God. Please forgive me of all my sins, as if
Right.
that's not the default nature of things.
Right.
And once you dropped those habits of external control psychology and really brought them internal, you started to feel so much more freedom.
Yeah, that's, I mean, absolutely. I think that that's really interesting. I hadn't been familiar with that paradigm, but
Yeah.
but I absolutely think that, that the Mormon church in particular is set up very much almost to an extreme extent to train you to look for external validation, right? I mean, that's the nature of worthiness interviews.
Yeah.
That's the point of being excluded from the temple or other ceremonies if you're unworthy, right? It's this kind of meta structure that functions as a controlling kind of overarching system in order to coerce out of people compliance. And yeah, I mean, I think that's it's pretty damaging, even if you're not tormented by it. You know what I mean? Like I was tormented by it because of my particular psychology, but I think about other people who maybe aren't as sensitive, maybe their consciences aren't as sensitive or what have you. And instead they use it as a weapon. They can weaponize it, right? It's like, because I meet the checklist and have this external validation, now I can like look down on you. Now I can judge you. Now I can shame you.
Yeah.
So either way, it can be pretty toxic.
Yeah. Yeah. And there were several times in your book where you presented something that was kind of like, not necessarily because now I'm righteous, I can look and I can judge you, but that where somebody is taking their own internal fears, insecurities, and they're projecting it onto somebody else. And you as a child were taking that in as, oh, well, this is just how things are. So for example, there was something with your mom where she came back from something and she was feeling really happy because this woman that she talked to told her that she was beautiful. And you're like, well, you are beautiful. And she said, you don't really think that, Katie. You're actually ashamed of me.
Yeah.
And you weren't. Like, there was nothing about you. Like, you just thought that this woman was amazing.
Yeah.
And that she would think, like, so that was her reality that she was carrying around because she was ashamed of herself.
Right, exactly.
And so she projected that out onto you.
Right, exactly.
And didn't really see who you were or what you were because she was so wrapped up in this. There was another one where you told your friends, I think this was when you decided not to go to Utah State. Was that it?
The University of Utah.
University of Utah for the acting program.
Right.
Because your dad's friend talked about the evils of the acting industry, and you've got very conservative parents, and so you decided, okay, I'm going to choose my faith instead of choosing my passion for this. And your friends told you, you've always thought that you're better than us.
Yes.
And they had no idea your internal world was, you were always like, I'm less than, I'm a sinner. I need, like, they had no idea. So they were projecting their own insecurities onto you as well. When you were writing those moments, did you have that in mind, that you knew that they were projecting this onto you and that you were taking it and you were holding it as if this were true? And that was part of the part of the cocoon that formed around you that you had to emerge out of and break down those false beliefs.
Yeah, wow, that's very insightful. I don't even know that I had those words in particular in mind. As you mention it, as you name it, it feels very resonant.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh yeah, that was going on. That's
Yeah.
absolutely true. But I don't know that in so many words I thought about it in those terms. Um it was more just like the way I experienced it was feeling, misunderstood,
Yeah.
feeling alone.
Yeah.
Um,
Because they were telling you this is how you are, and you're like, that's not how I am.
right,
That's
right,
not.
right. Yeah. But I was very agreeable too at the
Yeah.
time. And so then, yeah. So like you said, then I would internalize it and be like, oh, maybe I am that way.
Yeah, maybe it is
Maybe I
me.
am.
Maybe that's just one of those sins that I didn't know I was sinning that I've got to repent
Exactly.
from, and I'm still broken, and but they can see it and I
Exactly.
can't.
Exactly. Yeah.
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 There was another thing that you said later on, and this was after you had this moment where you first experienced grace for the first
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
And I think this was you went and saw Elder Bednar talk somewhere in
Hmm.
Moscow, Idaho,
Hmm.
and he told you what he told you. And, but you said something about how you had felt the reality of the grace of God, and that it wasn't this uh, LDS meritocracy that was an impotent trick.
Yeah.
And first of all, a meritocracy, which is all part of this external control psychology,
Yeah.
that whatever you do is where you get your worth from the
Right.
external
Yeah.
world,
Yeah.
and it's
Totally.
granted to you by the patriarchy. And
Yeah.
you called it a trick, meaning it's not real, it's not actual, but impotent, an impotent trick. And it made me think, just like your mom was projecting her stuff onto you, your friends were projecting her stuff onto you, the leaders of the Mormon church project their insecurities onto the entire church. That's why we have this impotent trick of meritocracy,
Hmm.
because they're afraid of not being good enough.
Yeah.
And then that creates this whole culture. We've been doing this.
Right.
It's like a rough
Because
stone
that's how
rolling.
it is. It's like a rough stone rolling.
There's
But
like a
because they
smooth
were
stone that's
raised in
rolling and
that
getting all these
too.
edges on it.
Yeah,
Actually, it's the opposite.
exactly. It is. It's like now it's like more jagged and more damaging, right? But no, I think that's really true. I think that, that they're victims of the system as well. Because they were also raised in that same system. At the same time, they're the only ones with the authority to change it, so I don't let them off the hook.
But they aren't, though. You changed it. You
Hmm.
changed your entire world,
Hmm.
right? You have changed your entire world. That's what this whole book is about. This transformation that you went through. And like I know it's kind of weird when people hear me say you should be thankful for the Mormon church for what they did to you, because it was hard.
Yeah.
But you bumped your head against this thing that wasn't what you felt was true until you felt what was true, and that's how you knew. Because you knew what it
Yeah.
wasn't.
Yeah.
You knew what it wasn't, and then you know how you want to be in the world. So what was it that that had you gravitate towards Christianity and embracing a view of God that was different than the Mormon view of God? And I think the experience that you had in the MTC with your grandmother
Yes.
was probably a very key part of that. So could you talk about that a little bit, and then just that transition?
Sure. Yeah. So I talk my grandmother was a really important figure in my life. She was someone that I looked up to quite a bit. She was a convert to the church, the LDS church. And but she died when I was 20, just about to turn 21. So as I think about it now, I'm kind of struck by how I had only a little bit of kind of adult time with her, and even then not really, because are you really an adult at 18 and 19, So I wonder how I would view a lot of this had she lived a bit longer,
Mm-hmm.
But she still was and remains sort of a person in my life that was really important. She was always very kind and very funny and smart and gracious and just someone that I looked up to so much. And when she passed away, right before I put in my papers for my mission, I kind of shoved my feelings down, which was something I did a lot of, where I didn't want to acknowledge that I was hurting or look at why I was sad too much. It's like, well, we'll see her again. I'm gonna push off the grief. I'm gonna pretend like it doesn't hurt as much as it does. But when I was in the MTC, a few months later, I was really, really struggling with my mental health. I was very anxious. I was depressed. And I just wanted to be able to talk to or see my grandma.
Yeah.
And I had an experience of kind of sensing her, with me.
You prayed to, didn't you pray and you say, Heavenly
Yeah.
Father, if she's with you right now, would you send
Let
her and
me,
just let me
yeah,
talk to
let
her for a
me,
minute?
yeah, yeah. And had this experience of, of love and of grace and of acceptance, in that moment, just feeling that she was with me. And so, yeah, I do think that that's a key reason why I kind of have retained belief in God. But
Well, and
even,
what I remember from your
yeah,
book that
yeah,
she told you was the universe is so expansive
yeah,
and amazing, and it's not what you think it is. It's
yeah,
so much bigger. It's
it's
so much
bigger.
more,
Right.
and that kind of stretched your mind in a way to go,
Hmm.
could there be something
Right.
other than what I've been told this is?
Right. Like a glimpse of transcendence.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So how do you go from there
Hmm.
to you still spent several years in the church and going through the motions, and I do want to read this one
Sure.
part from your book. Um this is after you had this experience of grace, and maybe you could talk about that as well. But you said,
Sure.
after that night, I continued to participate in the church for years. I even regained my temple recommend. I went to the interviews with cold pragmatism and told them what they wanted to hear. I convinced myself it was for the greater good. For the greater good. That's from Hot Fuzz. To have credibility enough to speak of grace as a fully participating member of the community, but it wasn't true. I was a liar, and I knew it. I'm not proud of it, but in a world gone mad, what wouldn't you do or say to preserve the only home you've ever known? Still, that night signaled a key shift. I no longer attempted to excuse the worthiness system nor the compromises I made to appease it. It was a bureaucracy to manage, a price I had to pay to belong. But even as they extracted the sum from me, even as I chose to surrender it to them, my inner conflict ceased. It was a transaction, my silence for their facade, nothing more and nothing less. I knew the bargain I was making and that God was nowhere near it. All right. So my question to you, when I read that
Mhm.
last thing, that God was nowhere near it, felt really strong
Hmm.
to me. Tell me what you mean by that God is nowhere near it.
So my I this is trying to think of the best way to answer this. It's a very good question. Really insightful question. So I think I'll start here. Um, I would have been one of those people, that I was one of those people who tried really, really hard, even after I knew the church wasn't quote unquote true in the way they said it was, to stay.
Yeah.
I listened to all the podcasts, I read Eugene England, and I, talked to Dan Witherspoon and Jana Reese, and they're still, friends of mine, and, folks that I admire and look up to. But it was very much like, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to do this is my tribe thing. I'm going to, just agree to disagree on basically everything of importance, but I don't want to leave and disappoint everyone and complicate my life this much. But always in the back of my mind, there was this wrestle, this fundamental concern, and this just this understanding that the whole system that is set up around worthiness interviews, the whole system that is set up around Temple Recommend, and frankly, the temple itself, like all of that whole system is completely antithetical to the experience of grace that I had. And that I have had, I guess I could say the experiences of grace that I've had. And so every time I tried to make it work, I would sort of be hit in the face with this. Just this understanding that they're not compatible. It's not compatible in any way. And so for a time, the way I managed that was to lie, right? For a time, the way I managed it was to say, well, that's wrong, but I'm going to just go along with it, because to not go along with it is to excommunicate yourself, right? In a very real way, whether or not you actually get called into a court of love, to say out loud, this isn't right, this isn't okay, that's the end of your belonging in the culture. And so I decided for a time that it was more important to me to be in the culture than to reckon with what it would mean if I really lived as I believed about what grace was. So I did do that for a while, but it didn't sit very well with me, and it didn't last super long, because at the end of the day, I knew in my body that it wasn't right, and that I wasn't being honest about not just it's not like the dishonesty in terms of I drank coffee and I said yes, that I obeyed the word of wisdom, which I totally did, right? I was well, you can interpret the word of wisdom to mean any number of things. And, you know what I mean? So it wasn't the dishonesty that I'm talking about. It was the dishonesty of living into a fundamental premise that I knew was completely antithetical to reality.
So when you're saying antithetical to reality, we're talking about reality. You're seeing as God, which I want to ask you about.
Sure.
And associated also with grace, which is this grace, unconditional love, acceptance of all things. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to do the right thing. You could even do the wrong thing, and you're accepted fully with love, which is antithetical to that meritocracy system and all of the interviews and the worthiness, and even asking a question like, do you drink coffee? Because if not, then you're not worthy. Things like that. You're saying these things don't match.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. So I've got a really tricky question for you now, and I'm not sure which one to do. Maybe let me start by asking you how you view God today. Like what is, when you talk about God, what kind of image do you have in your mind? What meaning does that word have for you?
When I think of God, these days I have in my mind, there's actually a painting that I think of that I'll try to find, and maybe I can send it to you, or you can link to it or something. But it's it's a painting of, it's sort of an impressionistic. I don't know. I'm probably saying the wrong words because I'm actually not an art scholar. But it feels like an impressionistic painting of movement and of a dance. And the imagination that I've developed over time about God is that of a dynamic interplay, give and take. Now, in the Christian tradition, we call it the Trinity, right? I'm going to pull out a fancy theological word, but what that really means is that God, in God's self, and I say God's self so as not to use a gendered pronoun, but right. So God, within God, is a dance of love. Traditionally, you call the persons, right, of God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Non-gendered language can sometimes be used: creator, sustainer, redeemer. There's other words you can use, to sort of describe that. But basically what it means is that existence itself comes about because this being, this energy, this entity in the universe loves within itself. And the ways in which that love is expressed is on every plane. So it's both universal, and it is universal, it is deeply particular, it is all encompassing, while at the same time is individual, right? And so that's some of the imagination that I have in my mind when I think of God. It's another fancy theological term for it is the ground of being, right? That's also Tillich. That it's what creates and holds reality.
Okay. Interesting. I remember many years ago, I think it was Randy and I did a PPI for John Hamer, and Randy was really trying to get John to define God. And I don't remember if he did or not, but now I'm tempted to see if I can go back and find that and insert what he said after what you just said. I think that
would be really fun to hear. I'd love to. I'd love to see what.
Let's see if I can find that.
If I was ever to convert to believing again, it would be to your God. But the issue I have with your God is he doesn't seem very accessible to the masses. And
my God why doesn't find your keys?
He does not. He does not find your keys at all.
Did not find your keys. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
But it's not even saying.
What I'm saying is this God, he, she, it, whatever. Why does he hide himself so carefully from the masses?
Sir, why did you take such pains to hide yourself?
Because there's not a, relatively speaking.
I don't know that it's not he anyway. I don't know that God,
whatever.
The divine is hidden from anybody, because it depends on how, again, we're defining the divine. And so in as much as the divine could be defined as everything, and it is all encompassing, everything that's all around us, all of our thought,
everything that is spiritual, the entire realm of ideas, all of the universe, all of knowledge, human knowledge, everything that we have accumulated, all of that can be encompassed within the divine. And in as much as that's the case, that's not hidden.
So what I hear you saying, you started with that picture, that impressionist thing, but it's like in motion, which I get the sense of, you're saying you can't really pin it down. You can't really, and it's not like I'm going to show the picture of two bearded men appearing to Joseph Smith, and like
correct,
but
right.
that it's pretty much everything. Do you think that it is everything, or that there are some things that are God and some things that are not God?
That is a good question. So yeah, I would definitely, I would say, so, okay. I'm going to try to say, I've tried to explain this to people before, and every time I do, they look at me like I'm out to lunch. So I'll try it on you as well.
As far as I'm concerned, Katie, we're all out to lunch. We're all grasping at smoke. We're trying to figure out what this is. It's like you said at the beginning of your book, like the story I'm telling would have been different 10 years ago. It'll probably be different 10 years from now. Right. The idea that we have of God, it's evolving, it's changing. So I'm just curious to know, like, where are you right now with what that means to you?
Yeah. So there's a theologian, and her name is Catherine something, and I've forgotten her last name because I'm a bad seminarian.
You're forgiven.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So she's been influential in my thinking because she talks about this question of difference, right? So what you're really getting at is kind of, I'm not going to use it, pantheism versus panentheism. There's some of these other kind of words about it. But she talks about how one of the things that really marks the Jewish as well as the Christian traditions is this sense of God's otherness. But that has too often been used to imply a sort of distance, right, from God and things that are not God.
Yeah.
And instead, she says that, and I think that this is getting at it. She says that we are used to thinking of difference in exclusionary terms, meaning like there's this thing and it can't be the same as this other thing, right? Because by definition, if you're one type of thing, then you're not the second type of thing, and that's the kind of difference that is often talked about, especially in, let's say, Christianity. And you probably, if you went on a mission and you argued with evangelicals, like you heard that, right? Like God is.
I went to Japan, so
okay. So they did not have any. That was not a question for you there, but
no.
But she says, that actually what makes God different is not that God is one type of thing to the exclusion of another type of thing, but rather that it is within God that all types of difference are held.
Yeah.
And that's the distinction.
And that's what this grace is, really, that you're talking about.
Right. Yeah. And that's the distinction between what, like, us who are not God and God who is God, is that in God, all types of difference are held, whereas we can't hold. Yeah. We can hold multitudes, but I would argue that we can't hold everything.
All right. Thank you for answering that question. Now I'm going to throw you the curveball.
Okay, here we go.
You ready? Okay.
Yeah.
So what does this amorphous God, who is full of grace and love and acceptance for everyone, what does he think about the Mormon Church and this meritocracy? And I'm sorry that I used the word he. It's just a habit.
It's okay. I'm not offended. I think, now, far be it from me to speak for God, because I think anytime...
Oh, no, I'm giving you permission to.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm giving you permission to, with the caveat that we know that it's not right. It's just what you're thinking. It's just what you're thinking right here and right now as we're working through all this.
Yeah. I I think that to the extent and in the places where Mormonism and the Mormon Church genuinely, truly produces service, kindness, love, care, those kinds of things, that any time those types of values are found like that, I would hopefully not be going out on a limb to say that God is pleased with that, right? That's okay. I do think that in the areas where there is coercion, where there is ruling by fear and domination, where there's fundamental dishonesty about the past, right? That those types of things I don't think would be particularly pleasing to God.
And so this is where we get into that problem of evil thing. So why, if there are certain things about the Mormon Church that the God would extend grace towards, and others would judge as being and condemn as being not right. Why allow that to happen? Why not just snuff it all out so that it's just the good?
That is a really good question. And I, unfortunately, I don't know that I have anything particularly, unique with that. I don't know. I don't know why. And I always get nervous when people try to solve the problem of evil by defending God, because I think what that actually does is defend evil. Right? It says, well, it's like in Job, right? In the biblical book of Job. All these horrible things happen to Job, which, by the way, is a poem and it's not literal. It's a thought exercise. But all these terrible things happen to Job, and he's sitting in sackcloth and ashes, and his friends show up, and for the first 3 days they just sit with him, and then they ruin it by trying to explain what happened and why. To a certain extent, it's less a question of for me, it's less a question of trying to explain why evil exists, and rather think about what is a compassionate, loving response in the midst of it when someone else is going through, horrible shit because someone died or they were abused or, their building in Miami collapsed. I mean, whatever, right? Or with myself too, right? To have that same kind of compassion and to sit with it and not necessarily need to explain why. That doesn't solve the problem.
No, I love that you went to Job. And it made me think back to this external control psychology, those 7 deadly habits, because when Job's friends come, what are they doing? They're criticizing, they're blaming, they're complaining, they're nagging, they're threatening, they're punishing, they're bribing. They're trying to say, Job, what is your problem? Why don't you get on board this external control psychology bus with us? And Job's like supporting and encouraging and listening, accepting, trusting, respecting, negotiating difference the whole time without going into this other thing. And they think he's nuts and crazy for it. Like, how bad do things have to get before you're finally going to try to change the world that you're living in instead of just accepting it because you found peace in your heart? How can you have peace in your heart when all these horrible things are going on around external to you? And I never used to see the story of Job that way, but and I don't know that I have an answer to the problem of evil either. I think it's a fun thought experiment.
yeah, and it's, it's the big one, right? Like if I'm ever doubting God, which of course I do because I'm a human, and I'm
Yeah.
not ashamed to admit that you know
Yeah.
that I have doubts as well. But that's always the one, right? You're like, well,
Yeah.
okay, but the Holocaust,
Yeah.
um,
All kinds of things. And how do you find the hidden gifts, the things to really be appreciative of and grateful for in an organization like the Mormon Church?
mhm.
Because if we're going to say, I now believe in and fully worship a God that is full of grace, and that's what I want to emulate on this earth. I want to be a person, have a heart that is unconditionally loving of everyone, but
Mm.
not them. That seems like, oh, I've been there, I've played that
Yeah,
game before.
yeah.
And how do I do it where I really truly mean it? Oh, and
Mhm.
even them.
Right.
And what is it that's going on? How is it that I could love, and so that I don't become one of those people that is projecting my own deficit onto
Mhm.
others, and then saying that's something that I can't accept, because that's a form of self rejection,
Yeah,
self denial,
sure.
rather than fully accepting the wholeness of everything, which I think is where that idea of grace is so powerful.
Mm.
Um, anyway, we've gone a little bit over the hour. I could talk to you about these ideas. I wrote down so many notes as I was going through your book.
Oh, that's
Is there
awesome.
anything that you wanted to talk about, or you hope to say that hasn't come up in the course of our discussion so far, Katie?
No, I think just, one thing that occurs to me, just to sort of mention or to name, as we've been talking about um, this question of grace, and even extending it, toward the people who have hurt us, or the systems that have hurt us, or things like that. I think if there's one thing I hope that the book does, is um it's to show grace, like even to the Mormon Church,
Mm-hmm.
which is not to say that it's excused for the harm that it does and that it did to me. Um, but it is to say that even that harm um, can be forgiven, and even there can be good and hope and healing and peace that come out of that, even a very painful
Yeah.
kind of situation.
Yeah.
Um,
Why did you title the book Sealed?
well, you will discover that as you continue to the end. But it's really playing with the word from a Mormon standpoint versus a kind of more grace-based standpoint, where in Mormonism, to be sealed is to have your family held hostage in a lot of ways. It's like, we're gonna take them away from you if you don't do all these things. But in a grace-based world, it's to understand that we're already sealed to one another and to God by the love and grace of God.
Yeah.
And that it's already a gift that we've received. We don't
Yeah.
have to be afraid of it going away.
Yeah. I love that. And I actually had this idea a while ago. I'm sure I've talked about it on the podcast before, but that my view of Joseph Smith has softened a bit over the years, where I feel like there were things that he was picking up on about truth and reality that he was trying to communicate, but then got sucked into a lot of the power and to some of these other things.
Yeah.
But one of those things that I think he was trying to communicate to people was this very idea of a grace that is already part of you. It doesn't need to be given to you. But I think that when he was teaching that, people weren't accepting it. They didn't believe it because they had been shaped and formed by their Protestant view that was telling them about their own sin and guilt. And so he said, well, let's create an ordinance then. We'll have this rite of passage where you can go from feeling like you're not sealed, and then you go through this ritual, which is what rituals do and have done all throughout history. We're going to do this transformation. So now you feel like you are sealed. Truly, you always have been, but you just didn't feel like you were. Now we're going to go through this thing. I'm going to teach you this, and you're going to come out of it feeling like you are. And of course, then that symbol, that ritual gets
twisted
right. and into exactly what it has become today, where now it's like, if you don't do all the things, then you're going to lose this thing. It's pretty tenuous here, but anyway, I think I share a similar view of what it means to be connected to humans, even though we have this sense of separateness. And what it means to strive for a life that is filled with grace, whether we're calling it grace or we're calling it something else, and whether it's through Christian symbols or it's through New Age symbols or Buddhist symbols or whatever, atheist, humanistic symbols, wherever it is. Anyway.
That's a very generous read of Joseph Smith. I like it.
Oh, yeah. I've made some shifts there.
In my less generous days, I'm like, he just made that up so that he could have multiple affairs. But that's more generous, what you just said.
Yeah. Well, I think he quickly learned how it could be used to facilitate those things as well.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for coming on, Katie. And where can people find you, and where can people find your book?
Sure. So you can find the book. It's called Sealed: An Unexpected Journey into the Heart of Grace, and you can find it wherever fine books are sold, mostly online, Amazon or IndieBound, bookshop.org if you prefer supporting independent booksellers. And you can find me. I have a website, katielangston.com. You can go to the publisher, thornbushpress.com.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for coming on, Katie. I hope we get to do this again sometime.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Put down the weapons that you use against yourself. You don't need them anymore. Lay down the weapons that you use against the world. We don't need another war. Put down the weapons that you use against yourself.
Hi, this is Hillary.
Matthew, Ryan,
Carol,
Keith,
Ashley, and I like to play bingo online while listening to Infants on Thrones.
You can comment on this episode on the website, infantsonthrones.com.
And if you really like what you hear, give the Quorum a 5-star rating and write a short review on iTunes.
I did.
Anyone for the closing prayer?
My worst crime is an inside job. Dark thoughts taking over like an inside mob. I tune into the scene between the eyes and take a breath.
Thank you for listening to Infants on Throne.
I sit still and watch the thoughts float past me. Never mind the future, never mind what the past be. I like to jump and let the universe catch me. 3-4, watch the beauty blow past me. I keep my pockets light, destination in sight. Keep my actions elevated to compassionate heights. I'm walking past the fight, laying down on the night. Choosing love when I pick up this mic.
I'll be the hero you've been dreaming of. We're gonna live forever, knowing together that we did it all for the glory of love. There you go. Again, we're defining the divine, and so in as much as the divine could be defined as everything, and it is all-encompassing, everything that's all around us, all of our thought, everything that is spiritual, the entire realm of ideas, all of the universe, all of knowledge, human knowledge, everything that we have accumulated, all of that can be encompassed within the divine. And in as much as that's the case, that's not hidden.
But why do you think that your God has designed the universe in such a way where the average person can't even come close to understanding it.
So
can I back up and say, John, do you believe that there's a God that designed the universe?
So I think that the problem with just even the concept of intelligent design is, generally speaking, that's an anthropomorphism.
Yeah.
So in other words, we're imagining God as a guy who's designing something, as opposed to that we have all of this thing that we are experiencing, all of this universe, and so which exists and has all of these things that we can learn about. And in learning about all of that's our exploration. Why don't we know about it? We haven't known anything throughout all of time. We have been people who have been massively more limited in all of our knowledge. The people at the beginning of civilization, so at the very beginning of literacy, there are geniuses. The person who wrote the Epic of Gilgamesh already has a concept of mortality that is 1,000 times more sophisticated than what later Christians are worrying about, thousands of years later than that. And it's sobering and amazing that anybody was so amazingly intelligent and thoughtful all the way back to the very beginnings of when there's even writing. And yet, so do we've only been getting more and more and more knowledge than we've ever had before. So I shouldn't imagine that we would already understand absolutely everything about the universe. It's not possible, probably, because we ourselves are finite beings within the universe, and the amount of things that there are to know is probably infinite. So therefore, there's a divide there that was just eternal.
Yeah,
but
like you're so if your God exists,
can I call time out? And Randy, can I ask you to not say your God, and because I think the way that John says it is the divine, and trying to stay away from God at all, and to say the divine.
Okay, so John, the divine that you ascribe to is either unwilling, incapable, or has some other design on, not making himself more understandable, accessible. And people, throughout the millennia have been fighting each other over what, their ideas of God is the true one. And if anyone else contradicts it, then they must die.
Yeah.
So is it part of the divine that you ascribe to? Is that part of his design, or is he incapable, or how do you see that? Do you understand the question?
So yeah, of course. So people have acted not only in the name of God, but also in all kinds of gods, right? Name throughout all of human history, based on their understanding and their conception of where they are at and how they've been able to perceive the divine and perceive the universe.
Or even an ideology like Nazism.
An ideology certainly. So, and which I don't even think is actually particularly different. So I think that when you have an atheist ideology, whatever, like Stalinism or Nazism, it doesn't matter. It's not that that's atheists are bad or something. It's rather this is something that people do. And in fact, it's not. Even though it's overtly atheist in some ways, there's a lot of religions that are overtly atheist. Like Buddhism may not believe in God as it's defined by Westerners, right? But I think that ultimately everybody actually, whether or not people reject the word God or the divine or however you want to define it, I think that ultimately people do have a belief, whether or not they're aware of what it is, because they may well believe that there are underlying physical laws of the universe, or whatever the thing is that they have. Maybe they're actually nihilists. Then they at least believe in nothing. So in other words, that there may be something, and then you're defining God as nothing. But that is
that is, it's been open throughout all of human history, and it is only a modern phenomenon when we have decided to have this very, very explicit picture of God that we don't personally believe in, and then we reject it, which I call rejectionism. And so that's a new thing, and it has existed in the modern times, and it hasn't existed previously in human history. And so what it does, and what modernism has done, is cut us off from our roots and cut us off from empathy and understanding everybody that went before us, which they were not believing in a modern conception of God. They were believing in something else, and we are not listening to them because we are considering them as having believed in our modern conception that we have created and then rejected.
So I want to go back to Randy's question and explore some of the assumptions that I'm hearing in it, and just to see if this stacks up, John, with the way that you conceive of the divine. Because I've heard you say in the past that the divine is undefinable, right? It's unfathomable. We just can't really understand it. And what I think I hear you saying, Randy, is that there is some divine that actually has an awareness of itself, an awareness of us, a will and a desire and a purpose, and all of these things that are kind of anthropomorphizing onto this divine. And I'm not. I don't know, John, if that even fits with.
Right. So I haven't said any of those things. Right. And so one of the ways theologians throughout time have defined the divine or God is what is called apophatic theology, which is you're a person who is less willing to make those kind of positive claims that Randy is maybe positing and rejecting, and saying instead that we can't define positive attributes of the divine. What we can instead say are the divine is not this, the divine is not that. So I'm perfectly happy with all kinds of apophatic theology, which is to say the divine is not a guy. The divine is not like a human who does all these petty things or is thinking in those kind of ways. That's not what the divine is. So but I'm not saying, therefore, in saying that, we're saying what divine is not saying the divine is limited in this kind of way. And that is something that people have done for millennia. So that is part of the conversation that continues to exist. It's not something I'm just made up. Yeah, but the divine is still, your divine is still not very accessible to the common man. And right. I find that troubling.
I would disagree with that, though. I still don't completely understand, John, what your divine is. But I think about so many rituals that different people have in the world that connect them to something that they feel is outside of themselves. Maybe it's not outside of themselves, but it raises them to a different state that they would consider divine, or it stimulates their thoughts.
All sorts of these spiritual practices that are like what I'm talking about when I talk about introspection, when you're trying to get at what your root beliefs are, when you're trying to connect down to what you truly believe, when you're connecting, therefore, that's spiritual practice. And that's what I would define as spiritual practice. And so to Randy's point, does my God, if he doesn't find your keys... I didn't say that. I didn't say your God. That's edited out. Okay, well, before we said, does my God find your keys? No, my God doesn't find your keys. Well, what's the point? If my God won't find your keys for you, what's the point, right? So it is harder to explain what the point is. It is much easier to have the black and white God of the fundamentalists. The main problem that fundamentalists have with their black and white God is that God doesn't exist.
Yeah, but the divine created our brains to be kind of black and white, to be in-group, out-group. And the result of all this is tribalism. My God versus, the other tribe's God. And it just seems really, really inefficient.
But when you, you're like the divine created, I get stuck on that, Randy, because if you forget about any idea of God and you just look at natural selection and evolution and you say that's the way that our God would create it, what would you call that? Nature? Like nature created, but there wasn't some will that you're ascribing to that or some design that you're describing to that. It just came about and evolved. And so couldn't that be the divine? And it's not something that has a will or a design to it. It's just higher ideas, like, these eternal spiritual ideas, and that even having this conversation right now where we're exploring ideas is a way of connecting to the divine.
Well, if I can't ascribe to the divine as having a purpose or some kind of, consciousness, then it's superfluous. And just go with the natural fucking world, because that's how things work, and everything makes sense when you go with the natural world.
Well, then the natural world is the divine to you. In other words, you're defining it that way. What is the purpose of
I don't need to ascribe divine to it. I just say it's the natural world. I don't have to add.
But the point of it is, that's what you're saying. In other words, in the whole course of all of civilization, that's how people have therefore defined that. You're just rejecting the term.
Yeah, but you always talk about, is a God worthy of worship? And if he's just this knucklehead that started this system that causes so much gratuitous suffering, and maybe we should talk about the problem of evil,
but we've already rejected that. We've already said that's not God, that's not divine.
Okay,
so we don't need to keep going back to that, But if
what I'm saying is if is your God? I just said it. Sorry.
It's all right. I get it.
Is your God worthy of worship either? If he's just kind of playing with, natural laws.
But
I don't know why you need. I don't know why.
He's not a guy who's playing with natural laws. Rather, what we're talking about is, instead of thinking of a guy, which you keep on coming back to, who's doing stuff,
I don't know how else to think about it.
Well, think of it as being wisdom, all of intelligence, the idea of intelligence itself. You should think that before you even think of a guy.
And
in other words, that's much more close to what I'm even talking about.
Think of the pursuit of knowledge, Randy, how important that is to you, and the using the scientific approach as a way of learning new things and testing and proving new things. You've got this drive to learn and explore the mysteries of the universe. There's nothing God about that, but I think that's akin to what John's saying is the divine.
But what I just keep getting hung up on is how disappointed I am in the divine's creations. How few of them have this intellectual curiosity to really find the divine and to find and to search out true knowledge, not just dogma, but knowledge. It's depressing. Do you understand where I'm coming from, John?
Yeah, but you have some different expectations for people than I do. So I guess I'm not disappointed constantly by people the way you are, because I guess I don't assume that people are all going to be like me. They're not like me in all kinds of different ways. We're like them.
Yeah, but I live in America. I don't live in Canada. And the vast majority of the people I come in contact with believe angels are real and believe that evolution is just an idea, and it's so despairing to see even the legislation that they're trying to push in the southern states about science education. It's like, oh my God, we're going backwards.
Right. And so the way that we can help all those people is by providing them with alternative religion that isn't based on this kind of nonsense, which is leading them down this really bad, stupid path that is actually having legal and legislative consequences. So instead, if we don't abandon them, just because everybody's able to go to graduate school, they're able to spend all this time thinking of this stuff. They have other things they have to do that is very important with their family and every other thing. So, but if everybody has abandoned them and the only thing they can do is go to a mega church where the person tells them, oh, it's all simple, just read here in Leviticus, blah, blah, blah,
Give money.
Yeah, exactly. And then just vote for us and we'll get rid of all of the dumb scientists who want to teach evolution to your kids or whatever it is by making it illegal. Well, what can you blame them? They don't have any alternative. They just wanted to go somewhere to raise their kids in a good church or something like that. They just had that idea, but there were no alternatives. So that's why
That's
But
why
my
we need
answer
to
to that-
instead provide something where we can, explain, no, this is how we can be connected to all of our heritage without viewing it in this very bad, negative way where we're throwing away all of our future.
Yeah, and so my answer to that is, if there is a divine, why can't he do a better job? Is he incompetent?
Randy, stop.
You're a fundamentalist. You want the divine to do all these dumb things that the fundamentalist God does.
I'm just saying, man. I know it doesn't work that way because there's no divine, but I just
There's no fundamentalist God.
if you're gonna add on an additional assumption, and we're talking about Occam's law here, I just think that additional assumption should add more than it does, and that's all I'm saying. And your divine is something I could totally embrace, because when we talk, we agree on about 99.5% of everything we talk about.
Right.
And you're a believer. You're on one side of the fence, and I'm an atheist on the other side of the fence. And I find that really fascinating.
But you guys both believe in the same thing, Randy. You're just calling it something different, and you're not hearing... Like you keep going back to divine and calling it he. And John's like, no, that's not what I believe.
Yeah, I mean, that's just kind of crutch. That's hard to, throw away.
Yeah.
I mean, I for 30 years of my life, I believe that he was a dude in the Kolob solar system. So,
right. I just have a different perspective of this by going back to looking at what people are writing throughout all of history. So I just spend all of my time in ancient and medieval texts, and I look at what people in the past have thought about this, and I don't have a view that is based on just what people have thought for the last 150 years. Yeah. And so that's why when you even say cynicism, I'm like, well, don't be so mean to the cynics. They were really they were great philosophers,
The cynics of the 12th century were awesome.
Exactly. Jesus was a cynic.
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.